We got lots of feedback from viewers last night and today about a story we did in the back half of last night's show, where our guest was a nuclear expert named Joe Cirincione. The story was about a mysterious explosion that happened Thursday last week in Russia. And I know from the feedback that we got from you guys that the news as of last night about that explosion, as we were able to present it here on the show, wasn't just dramatic news about a big explosion. It was very concerning news. I could read that in your feedback. Well, the story has become considerably more dramatic and more concerning today. So I want to start tonight with a little bit of an update on that. Now, as I mentioned, the explosion in question happened last week, Thursday, in the far northwest of Russia on the White Sea at a military site. And after whatever it was that happened there, Russian authorities put out an initial statement admitting that there had been a fatal accident, but they provided very few details on what had happened. They said 2 people had been killed in an explosion that involved a missile at a military testing facility. They said 2 people were dead, both military personnel. They said 4 people were injured. But they went out of their way to tell the public that this was definitely nothing to worry about in a wider way. This was definitely, in particular, nothing nuclear. The Defense Ministry put out a statement saying, quote, "There was no release of toxic materials into the atmosphere and the radiation level is normal." That always makes you feel reassured, right? Whenever anybody tells you the radiation level is normal. Despite that statement from the Defense Ministry, a pretty good-sized city about 20 miles away from that military site, the site of the explosion, posted a statement on their city website announcing that, in fact, they had detected a spike in local radiation levels. It was, again, about 20 miles away, 25 miles away from the blast site. People in that city saw that notice on their city's website and raced out to local pharmacies to try to protect themselves. People bought out local supplies of iodine, which potentially can protect your thyroid from absorbing too much ambient radiation, which is one of the first and most acute cancer risks that is posed by nuclear fallout. The local concerns about there being some radioactive component to that explosion were bolstered by local press reports that the people who had responded to the explosion, the first responders who were seen at the site of the facility where the blast happened, they all appeared to be wearing hazmat suits for some reason. So that bolstered those fears about radioactive contamination. But still, that was sort of circumstantial evidence. I'm sure nobody quite knew what to think after Russian authorities demanded that that city take down the references on its city website to the spikes in radiation levels they had noted at the municipal level. But by Saturday, the nuclear/radioactive element of this disaster was confirmed by the Russian government. Russia's state nuclear agency said 5 of its employees had died in the blast as well. So that announcement contained 2 important conclusions, right, for the people of northwestern Russia. Number 1, the death toll was not 2, as they had initially been told. It was 2 military personnel and 5 additional personnel from the nuclear agency. The other piece of information you get from that, because that statement came from the state nuclear agency, that confirmed that the accident was nuclear in nature. I mean, you're not going to kill 5 nuclear scientists in one explosion unless they're there for a reason, because you're doing something with nuclear power or nuclear weapons. That statement from the Russian nuclear agency also admitted in very vague, jargony terms that while, yes, the government had initially announced this was a missile explosion, the nuclear agency said that this missile involved a, quote, propulsive system involving isotopes, which is the most awkward possible way of saying that this was a nuclear-fueled missile. This is what we knew as of last night. This is the basis for our reporting last night. You've seen people like Joe Cirincione and also Jeffrey Lewis and other nuclear experts and weapons experts here on NBC and at other news outlets talking about this, trying to explain this accident, the seriousness of this, what kind of test might have gone so wrong that produced this fatal accident. Also, this scary caginess and secrecy from the Russian government about whether there's a threat here to the civilian populations nearby the site of the accident. I think nobody at this point can say they definitively know for sure, but at least the consensus of the Western speculation is that Putin's government might have been trying to test the sort of missile that he promised in last year's State of the Union address, which he described as a missile that was a nuclear missile, not in the sense that it was armed with a nuclear warhead. It would be a conventional missile, a cruise missile, essentially, but it would be powered by a nuclear reactor. Right? So you can imagine, instead of a conventional rocket, some sort of conventional jet propulsion system, what Putin has been threatening to build, what the U.S. actually tinkered with in the 50s and 60s and then abandoned as a terrible idea, what Putin may have in fact been testing in northwestern Russia here on the White Sea when this went so drastically wrong late last week, could be this idea of a missile that has a conventional warhead on it, but it is powered by nuclear energy. It is a missile that is fitted essentially with a flying nuclear reactor, which is the kind of thing that, of course, would be very bad news for the world if it worked. But well short of that, there's about a gazillion different ways that could be very bad news for the world when it fails and, say, blows up at a military testing facility on the White Sea on a Thursday afternoon. Well, today, the story got considerably worse than it had been even as of last night. Today, Russian military officials apparently visited a town that's even closer to the blast site than this city that had announced that it noticed this spike in radiation levels right after the blast. According to local news reports, residents in this very nearby city were told that they should plan to evacuate their city, but just for a few hours, which is kind of an odd request, right, or an odd demand. They'd have to evacuate their city tonight and into tomorrow for a few hours. Even though the explosion was last Thursday? Why would you have to just stay away for a few hours and now only days after it all happened? Then you're able to come back and everything's fine? It's an odd request, right, an odd demand from the government. It doesn't make much sense on the surface. It was nevertheless made all the more dramatic by the fact that they sent a special train into that town to take all the residents away. So maybe that's what they were planning on doing. Excuse me. And why that nearby town had to empty out. Maybe, might have been. But if that had initially been their plan, they apparently canceled it, which is like the one even more unnerving thing you can do in that circumstance. At the end of the day today, authorities announced, never mind, yes, they had been planning an evacuation for this little town, but that was now off. Whatever they were going to do that they wanted to evacuate the town for, they're no longer going to do it. Everything's fine now. Actually, you guys can all just stay. Never mind. Imagine if you live in that town. The governor of that region is now actually insisting that there was never any evacuation planned at all. Never mind the train we sent in there and all the rest of it. The governor from the local region now telling the press that any claims that there was an evacuation planned are, quote, nonsense. He says, actually, this is all a, quote, routine measure. Nothing out of the ordinary here. What are you looking at? Keep moving. Similarly, President Vladimir Putin's spokesman in Moscow, Dmitry Peskov, has been humming that same tune, telling reporters today that, quote, security is fully ensured. Quote, all agencies that are competent in this situation are supporting the complete safety of Russian citizens. The Washington Post has both a great editorial and some great reporting on this today, including from Pulitzer Prize-winning reporter Will England, who is writing on the crisis from Moscow. He notes today that a Russian federal agency, as of today, now admits to the radiation spikes. They admit that the defense ministry was wrong this weekend when they said there had been no increase in radiation. They're admitting, in effect, that the local city was correct when they said they had noticed a spike in radiation. That means they're implicitly admitting it was wrong for Russian authorities to tell that city to take that information off their website, since that information was, in fact, correct. Today, the government is confirming that, in fact, radiation levels spiked to up to 16 times normal levels. But then reporter Will England's dispatch from Moscow ends with this slightly even more disturbing report. Quote, a website called Dvina Today reported that 10 workers at the regional clinical hospital who had treated the victims of the explosion flew to Moscow on Monday and were taken to the Federal Medical and Biophysical Center. Quote, there was no word on why the doctors from the Archangel Regional Hospital had been taken to Moscow. That, I believe, was the first report in the Western press that the medical personnel, the doctors and the medical personnel who have been helping the people who were hurt in this blast, might themselves be in trouble. But that was the first report in the West. The essence of that has now been confirmed by multiple sources in Russia, including TASS and Interfax and Novaya Gazeta. And as of tonight, the New York Times is reporting it as well. Here's how the Times sums it up. Quote, a regional news site Northern News reported that doctors at a civilian hospital in Archangel, the largest city in the region, who first treated victims of the accident, had not been informed of the radiation danger. After treating the patients, the doctors at the regional clinical hospital found that their scrubs were causing radiation meters to click. The patients who were hurt in the initial blast had been taken to Moscow. The rooms where those patients had lain in the regional hospital were sealed after the patients were taken away. But then also the doctors who treated those patients were then transferred to Moscow for their own medical evaluations. According to the Times, hospital employees are in a depressed state. They don't understand why doctors and nurses who were fulfilling their professional duties were treated in this way. The New York Times quoting regional news sources in Russia there. The Washington Post's editorial on this crisis also links to this video, reportedly shot nearby the blast site. As you can tell, it shows a line of ambulances that are purportedly taking the injured away from the contaminated site. What is a little unnerving towards the end of this footage is that if you look closely, when we get a look at the back of some of these ambulances, it appears that the back of these ambulances, the doors where they would put patients in and out, are sealed with some kind of plastic film. And it's being speculated that that may be some sort of effort to try to seal in any radiation that could be emanating from the bodies of the people in the back of those ambulances. And so, looking from the outside in, as we are from another country, and as many Russian citizens are, right, trying to permeate this fog of nonsense and misinformation that is coming from their own government on this, for all of us, looking from the outside in, I mean, one, there's big picture concern about what exactly the Russian government was doing when this nuclear accident happened, right? What exactly they're trying to build here. What exactly is it that blew up? What was this supposed to be? Beyond that, though, the pit in your stomach about this is about the extent of the cover-up and what it is that they're not letting people know about what's going on. Each day of the news since the initial blast on Thursday has gotten worse. Every revision to what we understand has been more serious, not less. But the deeper pit in your stomach may not just be about the cover-up, but about the cleanup. What kind of cleanup or salvage effort is underway here? I mean, when they sent that special train into the little town nearby the military site today, that special train that was initially supposed to evacuate the town, local civil authorities gave a statement to the Interfax news agency that gave some clues as to what at least the locals had been told was the reason for their temporary evacuation order. Quote, the leadership of the Nanoxa training range informed us of planned activities of the military authorities. It was advised that residents of Nanoxa should depart the territory of the village from August 14th. What planned military activities? Well, a local TV outlet reported today, according to the New York Times, that residents had been told they had to get out ahead of early tomorrow morning because something was going to happen at that nearby military base where the explosion had happened. Something was going to happen there between 5 a.m. and 7 a.m. Wednesday morning, tomorrow morning. And so people had to be out of there before that window of time when Lord knows what was going to happen at the site of the disaster, and nobody could be in a nearby town. Quote, the possibility of evacuating the area raised the question of whether authorities see a continuing threat from Thursday's explosion, or if they may be preparing to retrieve the radioactive source, potentially posing new dangers. Quote, on Saturday, one Russian state news agency said the explosion on the test platform had knocked the scientists who died into the sea, suggesting the reactor, or whatever remained of it, also wound up in the water. One authority on radiation safety in Russia telling the Times in an interview that the military might have to, quote, fish the damaged reactor from the seabed. So maybe that's what they were planning on doing tomorrow morning between 5 a.m. and 7 a.m. local time, and they thought it might be really dangerous to the nearby town, and so they told everybody to get out, but now maybe they're not doing that? How are they cleaning up this site? What is it exactly they have to clean up, and how dangerous is it to people nearby, not to mention the people who are part of this response? And they didn't tell the doctors there was a radiation hazard when the patients came in from the blast site. Now the doctors themselves are being treated. One of the things that arms control expert Jeffrey Lewis has been raising a red flag about is the fact that a very specialized ship has been noticed nearby the blast site in the White Sea. It's a specialized ship that's used for collecting and storing liquid nuclear waste. So there's something going on that appears to involve maybe liquid nuclear waste and a potential cleanup effort and a potential but aborted evacuation. And the doctors are getting sick. I mean, just step back from this for a second. This is not as bad. This is not what we understood last night, and what we understood last night is bad. What we understand now is that apparently Russia is maybe trying to make weaponized flying nuclear reactors, and it's going badly. They had a catastrophic accident that appears to be related to that weapons program on Thursday. At least 7 people are dead from that accident. Hospital rooms where the injured were treated have been sealed off at the regional hospital. There are reports that the medical personnel who interacted with the dead and wounded have themselves now had to be medevaced to Moscow because of potential radiation exposure. The local government nearby appears to have been correct about radiation levels spiking, even as the Russian government and the Russian military initially denied that. They're now admitting it's true. They were apparently going to try to attempt something in the early morning hours tomorrow that they believe should occasion the evacuation of the closest town to the testing facility. But now that evacuation, including the special train they sent in for that purpose, all of it has been called off. The regional governor is, reassuring everybody by saying, actually, none of that ever happened. Where'd you hear that? The ambulances are being sealed off in plastic sheeting. Everybody at the response site is in hazmat suits. I mean, if a spewing experimental nuclear reactor that just killed 7 people has been cast into the sea, who do you call to fix that problem? And what dangers does it pose as you try to fish it out? I mean, we'll stay on this story, but we've only been following it for a couple of days, and it's exponentially worse. And part of continuing to follow it will be trying to figure out if you or anyone in Russia can trust anything that the Russian government says about what is actually happening on its own soil, including about the threat that may be posed here to civilians, certainly including the first responders and the medical personnel and whoever is involved in whatever this cleanup effort now is. And I mean, it is one thing to trust your government in good times when you generally approve of what they are doing, when things are generally going well. But can you trust them in a crisis? Do you trust them in a crisis? If you can't trust them in a crisis, how much worse can bad times get?
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.